in Germany we have this TV literary expert, and you call him the literary pope. So he's the pope of literature, and people think he has a very good niveau of everything, and he really knows when he says a book is good, the book is good.
Who is this guy?
His name is Marcel Reich-Ranitzky. Maybe you heard of him. And he's a very funny guy, and he's maybe 80 years old or something, and he has always this verdict on the book, so the book is shit.
He's part of your show? He's part of...
No. But he's just a figure in German culture. But at the same time, he always wants, what he doesn't want a book to be is boring. No, by no means boring. And at the same time, he really understands a lot about books, and he's really a good reader. But by saying all the time, well, things are not supposed to be boring, and I mean, I think that's really a mistake, and it's getting taken for granted. And I feel sometimes I also have this feeling that I don't want to be bored, but at the other side, I see that it's not the option. I mean, I don't know, it's not right. I somehow have this feeling, even if it sounds stupid.
No, it's, I mean, there's a difference, though, I think, between being mildly bored, but then there's another kind of boredom that I think you're talking about, which is reading requires sitting alone by yourself in a quiet room. And I have friends, intelligent friends, who don't like to read because it's not just bored. There's an almost dread that comes up, I think, here about having to be alone and having to be quiet. And you see that when you walk in. When you walk into most public spaces in America, it isn't quiet anymore. They pipe music through. And the music's easy to make fun of because it's usually really horrible music, but it seems significant that we don't want things to be quiet ever anymore. And to me, I don't know that I could defend it, but that seems to me to have something to do with when you feel like the purpose of your life is to gratify yourself and get things for yourself and go all the time. There's this other part of you that's the same part that can kind of is almost hungry for silence and quiet and thinking really hard about the same thing for maybe half an hour instead of 30 seconds, that doesn't get fed at all. And it makes itself felt in the body in a kind of dread in here. And I don't know whether that makes a whole lot of sense, but I think it's true that here in the U.S. every year the culture gets more and more hostile. And I don't mean hostile like angry, just it becomes more and more difficult to ask people to read or to look at a piece of art for an hour or to listen to a piece of music that's complicated and that takes work to understand because, well, there are a lot of reasons, but particularly now in computer and internet culture, everything is so fast. And the faster things go, the more we feed that part of ourselves but don't feed the part of ourselves that likes quiet, that can live in quiet, that can live without any kind of stimulation. I don't know. Let me insert one thing, which I'll bet you've noticed from talking to writers, is that most of the stuff that we think we're writing about in books is very difficult to talk about straight out, question and answer, and in some sense, it probably can't be talked about directly, and that's why people make up stories about it. This is all a big defense because I feel like what I'm saying is so simple and so reductive. To the extent that I understand it, being what you call grown up isn't a lot of fun a lot of the time. There are things you have to do. There are things you want to do that you can't do for a variety of reasons. And I think I think for young people in America, there are very mixed messages from the culture. That there's a streak of moralism in American life that extols the virtues of being grown up and having a family and being a responsible citizen. But there's also the sense of do what you want, gratify your appetites, because when I'm a corporation, appealing to the parts of you that are selfish and self-centered and want to have fun all the time is the best way to sell you things, right? And it works very well as a system for running an economy and keeping goods produced and sold, and it works wonderfully. The ways in which it doesn't work are much more difficult to talk about.
So what would I mean? Yeah, you said it's but what speaking of that, where doesn't it work?
One's reduced to talking, I think, about general terms like being grown up, or a term that's rarely used here anymore. And see, and now I feel embarrassment because I'm going to sound like my grandfather or something. But the word citizen, the idea of being a citizen, it would be to understand your country's history and the things about it that are good and not so good and how the system works, and taking the trouble to learn about candidates for political office, which means often reading stuff, which isn't fun. Sometimes it's boring. But when people don't do that, here's what happens. The candidates win who have the most money to buy television advertisements, because television advertisements are all most voters know about the candidates. Therefore, we get candidates who are beholden to large donors and become, in some ways, corrupt, which disgusts the voters and makes the voters even less interested in politics, less willing to read and do the work and do the work of citizenship. When I was a little boy, there was a class called citizenship, and here are certain things about America and America's history. Here's why it's important to vote. Here's why it's important not just to go in and vote for who the best-looking candidate is. There are things we know are right and good and would be better for us to do, but constantly it's like, yeah, but it's so much funnier and nicer to go do something else, and who cares, and it's all bullshit anyway. And imagine this show were running on American TV, and I were sitting in this hotel watching it. Okay, we've got this pointy-headed, nerdy guy talking about this stuff, or I've got, Pamela Anderson running on a beach, or a hilarious comedy. Which one am I going to watch? There's nothing wrong. It's not that there's anything wrong with being interested in stuff that's interesting and attractive. What it seems to me like here is that television and corporate entertainment, in order to make, because it's so expensive, in order to make money, it has to appeal to a very wide audience, which means it has to find things that a lot of people have in common. And I don't know about you, but here I think what most of us have in common here are our very most base, uninteresting, selfish, stupid interests. Physical attractiveness, sex, a certain kind of easy humor, vivid spectacle. I mean, that's stuff that I will immediately look at, and so will you, and so will you, and so will you, right? So it's in our very most base and kind of childish interests that we are a mass. The things that make us interesting and unique and human, those interests tend to be wildly different between different people. So my guess is, in terms of American mass culture as a mass, for things to get significantly different, what it's going to involve is fragmentation in the entertainment industry. When something like what's happened in the American magazine industry, where instead of 3 or 4 magazines with millions of subscribers, you have thousands of magazines, each with a few thousand. That is, if entertainment can get more niche-y, N-I-C-H-E is the English word, it's possible that these companies that put the stuff out can stay alive and make money without having to appeal to 10, 20 million people. Because I don't think it's evil. I think it's just the way that it works. The only way to get 10 or 20 million people all interested in the same thing is to pitch your appeal very, very low. Because maybe you're not interested in any of the things that I named, just immediately, but I am. I'm no different than anybody else. There are a few people who aren't interested in it at all, but I am.
Is that entertainment something we have to fight against? Like,
see, it's a strange question, because who would say entertainment is bad? I mean, I wouldn't say entertainment is bad. But a model of life in which I have a right to be entertained all the time seems to me not to be a promising one, right? I think part of the allure of both drugs and entertainment is escape, yes, from my problems and my life and having to be stuck in here. I can, pretend I'm James Bond or pretend to. It just it seems fine over the short haul as a way of life. It doesn't work all that well, though. No.
No, but in your book, I mean, there were a lot of people doing drugs and trying to, not have to feel those things anymore.
Yeah, well, stop me if I'm wrong, but because again, like I said, I did this thing like 7 years ago.
Just say what you think about it.
No, I don't quite get the question, because it seems to me like the parts of the book that have to do with drugs have mostly to do with this halfway house, where people who've been doing drugs for 10 years kind of stop and then sort of lose their minds, because all of a sudden now they are starting to feel some of this stuff. So if you're talking about the more general allure of drugs, to the extent that I understand it, which is about as specifically as I'm going to talk about it, it seems to me to be, and this isn't a very original thing to say, it's a pretty natural extension of corporate capitalist logic, which is, I want to feel exactly the way I want to feel, which is good, for exactly this long, and so I will exchange a certain amount of cash for this substance, and I will do it, but it's all of course a lie, because the control gradually goes away, and it stops being that I want to do it and becomes that I feel I need to do it. And that shift from I want something to I feel I need it is a big one. Yes, I mean, most of the problems in my life have to do with my confusing what I want and what I need. And one of the things it causes is tension and unhappiness in people. I don't think it's very complicated, and I don't think I've named the only reason for it. The paradox is that sort of tension and complication and conflict in people also makes them very easy to market to, because I can say to you, feeling uneasy, life feels empty. Well, here's something you can buy or something you can go do. It makes us. It makes for the economics term is inelasticity of demand. I demand all the time, no matter what the price of it is, and it works really well in an economic way, emotionally, spiritually, in terms of citizenship, in terms of feeling like a meaningful part even of this country. Forget the world, and I'm sure the U.S. government's sort of arrogance and disdain for the rest of the world is unpleasant, but it's also a natural extension of certain cultural messages we send ourselves about ourselves that work very well in some ways and make us very rich and very powerful. It's all complicated. Well, when I was growing up, one of the mythological periods for us growing up is the Great Depression, right? Weimar era. Where the story goes, everyone pulled together. There were hard times and no one had enough, but everyone pulled together and everybody. It seems to me now that the country's reaction to feeling frightened and insecure is to buy sports utility vehicles that are large and massive and tank-like and make individual people feel safer, but also get 4 miles to the gallon. In a country where gasoline is probably 1/5 as expensive as it ought to be, there's a sanity in Europe about gasoline prices and fuel consumption that there isn't here yet, and yet are voting for people who are deciding to go over and very possibly kill hundreds of thousands of civilians in order to kill a few enemies, and none of which is important, but the fact that no one here is talking about the connection between how we live and what we drive, and the things that are happening, the speed with which it's become those bad people, those bad fanatics, they're evil. What they really hate is our freedom and our way of life, which is just hard to swallow, right? Like, who hates freedom? You know, people hate people, not freedom. I now don't know what's going to happen, and I am, as an American, as scared. Not since I was a little boy and I worried about the U.S. and the Soviet Union having an intercontinental. I remember, not since that have I been this scared. And this is totally personally, but I'm more scared of us than I am of anybody else, and that's a bleak place to be. I'm not sure how I feel about. Well, you're going to use it if you want. I don't think this is an evil country. I don't think American people are evil. I think we've had it very easy materially for a long time, and we've gotten very little help in understanding things that are important besides being comfortable. And I don't think anybody knows how we will react if things get really hard here. And the fact that we're strong militarily and economically is a good thing, but it's also a frightening thing. So, the people I know who are rebelling meaningfully, you know, don't buy a lot of stuff, and don't get their view of the world from television, and are willing to spend 4 or 5 hours researching an election rather than going by commercials. And the thing about it is that in America we think of rebellion as this very sexy thing, and that it involves, you know, action and force and looks good. And my guess is the forms of rebellion that will end up changing anything meaningfully here will be very quiet and very individual, and probably not all that interesting to look at from the outside. I'm now hoping for less interesting rather than more interesting. Violence is interesting, and horrible corruption and scandals and rattling sabers and talking about war and demonizing 1 billion people of a different faith in the world, those are all interesting. Sitting in a chair and really thinking about what this means, and why the fact that what I drive might have something to do with how people in other parts of the world feel about me isn't interesting to anybody else. That was very close to the truth, but I don't think it's going to make much sense.